Hello, my name is Deborah Laurel, and I welcome you to the Training Mastery Series. Today, we're going to be talking about interactive and experiential art and discussion learning activities, and this is for soft skill and technical skill trainers. If you'd please introduce yourself in chat, your name, your location, your company, what type of training you do, and how you heard about the program. Thank you. A little bit about me. I have designed and delivered skill-building training programs for over 45 years on a national and international basis. I have trained and certified trainers in the United States, Kenya, Nigeria, Zambia, Croatia, Jordan, and the United Arab Emirates. This is a quick start welcome. What is the one thing that would make this session worthwhile for you? Please enter your response in the chat window. Thank you. How many of you know the difference between interactive and experiential learning activities? Okay. How many of you would like to learn some activities? That's why you're here. So, interactive learning activities engage learners by allowing them to actively participate and verbally respond within the learning environment. So they're not sitting there passively. It's characterized by mental stimulation and verbal expression. Experiential learning activities, on the other hand, engage learners physically, mentally, and emotionally in a multisensory experience. And this is important because our memory is lodged in the emotions. It's characterized by emotional stimulation and physical expression. The design and facilitation of a learning activity will ultimately determine whether it's interactive, experiential, or both. For example, physical activity can be added to almost any activity. The bottom line is that the more learners are engaged and stimulated mentally, emotionally, and physically, the more likely they are to learn and to retain what they learned. There are 10 broad categories of interactive and/or experiential learning activities that I have determined, and these categories often overlap. We're going to look at the first two categories: art and discussion. Art is any creative design activity intended to embody training concepts in a visual or tactile manner. One of my favorite activities is to ask participants to draw a picture of themselves, either as a food, a vehicle, or an animal, and label their characteristics. And the latter is most important because we're not that concerned about their artistic ability. I had one fellow who was writing about how he felt about his organization. He drew a battleship with a bunch of people drowning and nobody throwing a life preserver. Another woman said, "I am a hot fudge sundae and everyone gets a bite but me." We can use art supplies to create an image of the training essence or a metaphor. For example, if you're teaching supervisors about helping to nurture employees, you can bring this is material heavy, I'll admit to that. You can bring a small fake tree, you can get these miniature ones. And you can also get miniature flowers and fruits and berries, and you could have them put them on the tree. And as they're doing it, talk about how we need to nurture employees and they need to be tended and listened to and given feedback, just as they need rain and sun and tilling the soil. We can have them create a mind map if you're not familiar with those, a very simple mind map would have a circle in the middle, and let's say it says communication, and then there would be spokes on coming around from either side of the circle, going to other smaller circles where, when we think about communication, well, that involves listening, that involves different personality type needs. You see, so you would be putting the different ideas around it. And it's one way to visualize what all the concepts that are involved in the content that you're teaching. You can have them design a board game and game pieces that they can then use to play the game. The game board could be on cardboard. It could be just drawn on a flip chart, a piece of flip chart paper. You can have them produce an agenda map. You could put up on butcher paper a long piece of that, and you could have each of the agenda items listed. And then as you go through that, you can have participants go up and draw or say or write what the activities were or what their key takeaways were from each of the agenda items. You can have them represent a room layout. As trainers, we're often in rooms that don't meet our ideal circumstances. So what would an ideal training room look like? So they can just draw it, or they can actually take pieces of clay and create it. You can have them draw a cartoon of a certain personality type or behavior. And this is particularly fun if you have, let's say you have a bunch of task-oriented people and they have to create a cartoon of their behavior in the extreme. People have a lot of fun with that. And it helps for them to recognize how they're seen through the eyes of others, or how they could be seen. They could create a composite of different pictures. I have brought in pictures cut from magazines and asked them to pick out the ones that represent how they feel about themselves, or how they feel about their organization or their team. Okay, let's move on to discussion. That's any activity involving verbalization of thoughts, questions, or experiences related to the training content. Now, if you're a trainer, you are already very familiar, and even if you're not a trainer, you're familiar with directed large group discussion, where the trainer poses a question and then fields responses from the participants. In small group discussion, it just happens in the small group. It could be a questionnaire, it could be a worksheet where they discuss their answers, and then some representative of their table reports back. And I'm talking about having participants 5 to a table. Question and answer. The certain content is presented by the trainer, and then the participants ask questions, the trainer answers them. Paired discussion. I have used that in customer service training, where I have people pair off and take turns talking about their most enjoyable customer service experience and their worst customer service experience, and then have them join with other pairs to post on a flip chart what are the characteristics of a good customer service experience and what are the characteristics of a poor customer service experience. Debate. This is particularly useful when you have a concept where there's no right or wrong. They're just different perspectives. I like to use debate in my Train the Trainer programs to have people identify the pros and cons of lecture. So one half of the group would be given the assignment to come up with the pros, the other half of the group, the cons. They would each select who their debater is going to be, and then the debater would debate using all the information they gained from their group. A panel discussion. In a supervisory training, bringing in seasoned supervisors to talk about what they wish they knew when they were first starting out, or how they handle certain problematic situations, can use a panel discussion very nicely. Peer teaching. This is particularly useful if you have a multi-day training, because you have people pair off and they take turns telling each other the high points of the content from the previous day. So they're kind of teaching it back to each other. And between the two of them, they'll remember, and then retain those key concepts better. Group problem solving, giving them a case study, for example, to work through in the small group, and then report out. A gallery walk. This is where we have flip charts around the room, and there's a different question on each flip chart. I have used it in my train the trainer programs to have the participants come up with ideas of how to implement different levels of Kirkpatrick's evaluation levels. So I group them, and each small group has a different colored marker. And the groups start at their own flip chart and come up with some ideas in response to the question. I ring a bell or I clap, they move to the next flip chart, do the same thing. They're just adding to whatever the original group had written, and to keep doing that until you get them all around back to where they started. And at that point, you can have them each group report out all of the responses. A pair share. Although I call it a pair share, it's really a little bit different than that. I use this at the beginning of a training program to create expert groups. And so if they were trainers, I would say, who considers themselves a seasoned trainer, please think about what you wish somebody had told you when you were first starting out. Those of you who are new or less seasoned trainers, think about a question you've always wanted to ask a seasoned trainer. Then I line them up on opposite walls, give them the go-ahead to create small groups that include both seasoned and unseasoned, where they share their answers, they ask their questions, and I keep the group together that way, at least for the morning. The walkabout happens at the end of the training, where I have people, again, pair off, but with someone that they didn't spend much time with during the training. And they walk for 4 or 5 minutes, sharing what they plan to do with what they've learned. Because we know that with goal setting, if you speak it, it increases the probability that you will do it. And then a scavenger hunt. This is a way for people to share knowledge. So I might say, if you need to learn how to use art in your training, go and find 3 people who use art and write down the activities that they use, and also write down their names so you can follow up with them. And if you're good at using games, you can tell them how you use games. So it's a way to take advantage of the expertise in the room. The snowball toss. And I don't know if you've thought about these things, but they all involve discussion. The snowball toss, you have individual participants write down on a piece of paper one challenge or question they have regarding the content of the training. They scrunch it up, they throw it in the air, and then they pick up one that comes next to them, open it up, and take turns reading what is written there and either answering it themselves or opening it up to the group to come up with a group answer. Rotating flip charts. It's kind of a variation on the gallery walk because it operates in a similar way, but it starts differently. The idea here is that you've got small groups working on different issues. Yesterday, I was working with conducting a management training program, and one of the issues was dealing with difficult employees. Okay, so what are those behaviors? Well, being late, resisting change. You get the picture. So one group worked with being late, one group worked with resisting change, other groups worked with other ones, and the small group came up with why the person would act that way and how the manager should handle it. And then once they were all done, because this is not a timed activity, then they were to stroll to the next flip chart and either add or revise what's written there to make it better. So they're editing it. And again, they're using different colored pens, so we know markers, so we know who had said it. And they keep doing that until they get back to their original one where they can see all of the comments and changes and additions that had been made, which ends up giving them a much better answer. An envelope pass. This is when, toward the end of a session, there are certain challenges that have not been addressed as yet. So the trainer writes each challenge on a different envelope and comes up with enough challenges so that there's a different challenge for each of the tables. Let's say there are 5 tables. So 5 envelopes. Each table has index cards. And so table 1 starts with whatever the question is, whatever the challenge is, and they brainstorm and write their answers on how to handle it and on index cards and put those index cards into the envelope. And then it goes on to the next table and they get a new one. And each table doesn't open up the envelope and read what has already been written. They just brainstorm it themselves from a fresh perspective. And by the time it gets around to the original proposers, the individual who had that issue now has an envelope with all of these suggestions, and you can have them rate them, and there are various other things you can do. But that's another form of discussion. In summary, art and discussion. Interactive learning activities stimulate us mentally, and we have an opportunity to verbally express what we think or feel. Experiential learning activities stimulate us emotionally, and there's some physical component typically. We can use art to embody a metaphor. And as you've seen, discussion goes far beyond directed large group or small group discussions. And it's part of many interactive and experiential categories. So I hope that that was useful. Do you have any questions? If you do, please feel free to contact me, Deborah Laurel. Our upcoming training on December 21st at 11 o'clock Central Time is looking at dramatization and writing learning activities. And I hope that you will join us there. If this was useful, I would appreciate it if you would leave a review that includes your key takeaway at this, on my Google profile. Thank you very much for attending.